What Russia did today crossed a line that Western leaders had hoped would hold. And when that line broke, Volodymyr Zelensky did not hesitate. He responded with precision, with fury, and with a ruthlessness that caught even Moscow off guard. This is not speculation, this is not exaggeration. This is what happened today, and why Washington is now scrambling to understand just how dangerous the next 72 hours could become. For weeks now, there had been signals, not from official Kremlin channels, not from formal diplomatic communications, just signals that Vladimir Putin was preparing something unprecedented. Putin has been aggressive, yes, but he has been calculated in his aggression. His moves have followed a certain rhythm, a pattern, almost a predictability that Western analysts had learned to read. But what set off alarm bells in Washington this week was that the rhythm went silent. Intelligence officials who monitor Russian military activity know the indicators, the unusual movement of strategic assets, the sudden increase in encrypted communications, the repositioning of air defense systems, the sudden silence from commanders who are normally active. All of that went quiet, and whenever Putin goes quiet, it means something is about to get loud. For 3 years now, this war has followed certain unwritten rules, boundaries that both sides seemed unwilling to cross, escalation thresholds that served as informal guardrails. Russia would push, Ukraine would resist, the West would supply, and the world would watch. But tonight, those rules may have been permanently rewritten, because what U.S. intelligence detected in the early hours of this morning was not just another tactical adjustment, it was a strategic pivot. A pivot that suggests Putin is no longer playing the long game, he's playing for keeps. Early this morning, U.S. satellite reconnaissance detected what analysts described as an unprecedented repositioning of Russian strategic assets, including nuclear-capable delivery systems that had not been moved from their bases in over 18 months. These are the kinds of assets that Russia only deploys when they are signaling something very specific, deterrence, escalation, or preparation for a strike that would fundamentally alter the nature of this conflict. Intelligence officials didn't know which category this fell into, or whether it fell into all three at once. But what they did know was that Putin was changing his posture, and when a nuclear power shifts its strategic posture without explanation, even by the smallest measure, every government on Earth pays attention. Within hours, emergency briefings were convened at the Pentagon. The National Security Council was pulled into an unscheduled session, and calls were made to Allied capitals, London, Paris, Berlin, Warsaw, warning them that something significant was unfolding. The message was simple but terrifying. Russia is moving pieces we haven't seen move since the Cold War, and we don't yet know why. But the why became clearer as the day progressed, because what intelligence analysts discovered next was even more alarming than the initial detection. Putin wasn't just repositioning assets, he was activating protocols that suggested he was preparing for a decisive move, one designed to break the stalemate and force the West into an impossible choice. The warning issued by the Pentagon tonight was not normal, it was not routine, it was not symbolic, it was urgent. Official after official, briefing after briefing, described Russia's move as provocative, destabilizing, and perhaps most importantly, potentially irreversible if allowed to proceed unchallenged. Putin's strategy has always relied on one thing, making his adversaries hesitate. He counts on the West's caution, on their fear of escalation, on their reluctance to match his aggression with equal force. But that strategy only works if the target hesitates. Zelensky did not. In fact, Ukraine's response today was among the most aggressive and coordinated military actions we've seen since the war began. Here's what we know. Within 6 hours of intelligence confirming Russia's strategic repositioning, Ukraine launched a massive strike campaign targeting Russian military infrastructure deep behind the front lines. These weren't the limited defensive strikes the world has grown accustomed to. These were precision attacks on command and control centers, logistics hubs, and, most significantly, the very facilities that Russia was using to coordinate its latest escalation. Ukraine struck with everything it had, and it struck before Russia could complete whatever it was planning. Tonight, Ukrainian military sources confirmed that their forces launched coordinated attacks on over 24 high-value Russian targets, including a command bunker in Crimea that had recently been reinforced for what analysts believe was a major operational headquarters. Ukraine hit it before Russia could activate it. They hit fuel depots that would have sustained any offensive operation. They hit communication relays that were likely coordinating the movement of those strategic assets. They hit ammunition storage facilities that were preparing to supply forces for what intelligence suggested was an imminent operation. In other words, Ukraine targeted the nervous system of Russia's escalation, not the muscles, the brain, the logistics, the coordination, the infrastructure that would have made Putin's plot operational. This is what made Washington's warning so urgent. Putin's repositioning wasn't just symbolic, it was actionable. It represented the kind of move that could fundamentally alter the trajectory of this war if left unchecked. And Zelensky, understanding that fully, responded with overwhelming force, not recklessly, not impulsively, but strategically. He didn't waste strikes on symbolic targets. He didn't launch attacks designed for propaganda value. He hit the command centers. He hit the supply lines. He hit the infrastructure that would have enabled whatever Putin was planning. And according to early damage assessments, he hit them hard. And here's where the story becomes even more disturbing. U.S. intelligence officials now believe that Putin's latest move was designed to test the resolve of the Western alliance after months of political uncertainty. Putin wanted to see whether Washington would waver. He wanted to see whether European support would crack. He wanted to see whether Ukraine, exhausted after 3 years of war, would finally begin to fold. But instead, the opposite happened. Ukraine didn't fold. They launched a counterattack that was so swift, so precise, that even the Kremlin appeared caught off guard. You don't catch Vladimir Putin off guard easily. But today, Zelensky did. Senior defense analysts speaking with media outlets under anonymity described Putin's gambit as coercive signaling, a way to force concessions through the threat of escalation rather than through actual combat. But Zelensky proved today that Ukraine remains both capable and willing to fight. Their strikes were not only effective, they were calibrated so precisely that they degraded Russian capabilities without triggering the kind of response that would give Moscow justification for further escalation. That calibration matters because it shows something crucial. Ukraine is not just fighting, they are thinking, they are anticipating, they are staying one step ahead. It shows that Zelensky is not merely reacting to Putin's moves, he is shaping the battlefield, he is dictating the tempo, and that is something Putin has not experienced since the earliest days of this war. As reports continued coming in throughout the evening, we learned more about the scale of Ukraine's response. Ukrainian air assets carried out long-range strikes on targets in occupied Crimea, forcing Russian air defenses to expend valuable interceptor missiles. Ukrainian ground forces targeted Russian logistics convoys that had been positioned in the last 72 hours, convoys that intelligence suggested were preparing for an offensive push. Ukrainian cyber units operating in coordination with kinetic operations reportedly disrupted communication networks used by Russian commanders to coordinate the strategic repositioning. This wasn't just a military response, this wasn't just a defensive measure. This was coordinated warfare. This was strategic disruption on a scale that demonstrated just how capable Ukraine has become. And strategic disruption is the one thing Russia has struggled to counter since this war began. For every advance Moscow has made, Kyiv has countered with something that undermines it. For every escalation Putin has attempted, Zelensky has responded with something that neutralizes it. Tonight was no different. If anything, tonight was the clearest demonstration yet that Ukraine will not be intimidated. Remember, Putin thought this war would last 3 days. He thought Kyiv would fall within a week. He thought Zelensky would flee, the government would collapse, and the West would issue strongly worded statements before moving on. He thought wrong. But tonight, the exact opposite is happening. Kyiv is standing, Zelensky is fighting, The West is more united than it has been in decades, and Russia, the supposed military superpower, is struggling to maintain the initiative against a country a fraction of its size. This is not the war Putin planned. This is not the victory he promised his people. And tonight, after Zelensky's ruthless counterattack, it is clearer than ever that Russia is not winning. They are surviving. And there is a significant difference between the two. What makes this moment so critical and so dangerous is that Putin's latest move happened at a time when the Russian president is under extraordinary pressure. Hardliners within his own government want more aggression, military commanders want more resources, oligarchs want the sanctions to end, the Russian public wants the war to produce results. Putin is balancing these demands while managing a military campaign that has already cost Russia more than anyone anticipated. And when leaders in that position make sudden dramatic moves, they're not doing it from strength, they're doing it from pressure. They're doing it from desperation. They're doing it because they feel their options narrowing, their leverage shrinking, their window of opportunity closing. That desperation is what makes this moment so volatile. A desperate Putin is an unpredictable Putin, and an unpredictable Putin is a dangerous Putin. Washington understands this, which is why their response tonight was so urgent. The Pentagon statement, now distributed to every major news outlet in the Western world, was designed to signal that the United States is not willing to allow Putin's escalation to go unanswered. Defense officials said plainly that Russia's repositioning of strategic assets was inconsistent with responsible nuclear stewardship and existing arms control frameworks. That is diplomatic language for we see what you're doing and we will not accept it. You don't usually hear that tone from the Pentagon unless something serious is at stake. This wasn't a routine condemnation. This wasn't a symbolic gesture. This was a warning, direct, unambiguous, and backed by the full weight of American military capability. And it came with a clear implication. If Russia continues down this path, the United States will respond, not with words, with actions. Meanwhile, Volodymyr Zelensky addressed the Ukrainian people in a defiant, resolute speech tonight. He said, "We will not be intimidated by nuclear blackmail. We have faced this threat before and we are still standing." He said, "Every missile Russia fires, every threat they make, only strengthens our determination to fight until victory." And he said, "To those who think Ukraine will break, watch what we do next. You haven't seen anything yet. These are not rhetorical flourishes. These are not empty words. These are statements from a wartime leader who understands exactly what is at stake and who is prepared to pay any price to defend his country." Zelensky has become in many ways the symbol of resistance against authoritarianism, and tonight he proved once again why that reputation is deserved. Here's what makes the situation even more concerning. Putin's latest move wasn't isolated. Along with the repositioning of strategic assets, Belarus also increased military activity along its border with Ukraine, raising fears of a potential northern front. Russian naval forces in the Black Sea conducted unusual maneuvers that intelligence analysts are still trying to interpret. Russian cyber operations increased attacks targeting Ukrainian infrastructure and Western government networks. All of this happened within the same 48-hour window. When Putin moves multiple pieces at once, it means something larger is underway. It means he is not making isolated tactical adjustments. He is executing a strategy, and that strategy, whatever its ultimate goal, appears designed to pressure Ukraine and the West into concessions before the window of opportunity closes. Intelligence analysts are now considering several possibilities. One is that Putin is preparing for a major spring offensive, a last-ditch effort to break through Ukrainian lines before Western weapons deliveries make such an offensive impossible. Another is that Putin is attempting to create a crisis serious enough to fracture Western unity, hoping that fear of nuclear escalation will lead some European countries to pressure Ukraine into negotiations. A third possibility, the one worrying officials the most, is that Putin is attempting to force the United States into a direct confrontation, believing that a limited clash with American forces would rally domestic support and justify further escalation. But today, Zelensky took that card off the table. He didn't wait for Putin to complete his preparations. He didn't wait for the West to decide how to respond. He didn't wait for the situation to deteriorate further. He struck first, he struck hard, and he struck in a way that degraded Russia's ability to execute whatever it was planning. What we're watching now is a test of resolve. Putin wants to see whether the West will blink. Zelensky wants to show that Ukraine will never surrender. Washington wants to prevent this crisis from spiraling into something that cannot be controlled. And Europe wants to prevent a wider war that could engulf the continent. These competing interests are now colliding in real time, and the outcome will shape the future of global security for decades to come. This is not hyperbole. This is the reality of the moment we are living through. Tonight, we've heard from intelligence sources who are now monitoring Russian activity on an hour-by-hour basis. They say Putin has not yet responded to Ukraine's strikes, an unusual delay that suggests the Kremlin is still assessing the damage. They say Russian military communications have become chaotic, with commanders apparently struggling to coordinate after the loss of key command and control nodes. And they say Putin's decision to reposition strategic assets is likely part of a broader coercion strategy intended to force concessions before the next phase of the war begins. But Ukraine is not backing down. In fact, Ukraine is doubling down. Their response today, swift, devastating, and precisely targeted, sent a message to Putin that intimidation will not work. And it sent a message to Washington that Ukraine remains a capable and determined ally worthy of continued support. As the night goes on, we expect more details to emerge about what exactly Putin hoped to achieve with this dangerous gambit. But what we do know is that Washington's warning was timely. It exposed Putin's intentions before he could fully execute them. It rallied Western allies around a unified response, and it gave Ukraine the political cover to strike first and strike hard. What happens next will depend on what Putin does in the next 72 hours. If he backs down, this moment will be remembered as the day his bluff was called. If he escalates further, the United States and its allies have already shown they are prepared to respond. They have shown they are watching. They have shown they are ready, and tonight, for the first time in months, Vladimir Putin appears to be on the defensive. The Kremlin is quiet, too quiet, and when Putin is quiet, it means he is recalculating. It means he is choosing his next move carefully, because tonight Vladimir Putin learned something he should have learned long ago. Ukraine will not break. The West will not abandon its allies, and Volodymyr Zelensky will strike back with everything he has. This story is far from over. But tonight, one thing is clear. Putin's plot has been exposed. Washington is watching, and Ukraine is fighting back harder than ever. And we will be here watching every detail as the next phase of this historic confrontation unfolds.